She called the police on a black teenager for taking photos in his own neighborhood. What she didn't know: his mom is the FBI director. Wait till you see how this ends. Welcome to Stories with Mr. Gray. If you love uncovering the truth and standing up for justice, hit subscribe, like, and drop the flag of your country in the comments below. The October afternoon sun cast long shadows across Millbrook Heights, one of the most affluent neighborhoods in the city. Tree-lined streets curved past million-dollar homes with manicured lawns, three-car garages, and the kind of quiet that only money could buy. It was the type of community where everyone knew everyone else's business, where property values were discussed at dinner parties, and where anything out of the ordinary was viewed with immediate suspicion. Carol Henderson adjusted her oversized sunglasses as she stepped out of her white BMW, fresh from her weekly tennis lesson at the country club. At 52, she had spent the last 15 years cultivating the perfect image of suburban sophistication: perfectly styled blonde hair, designer athleisure wear, and a sense of entitlement that came from never having to worry about money. Her husband Richard was a successful corporate lawyer, and they had worked hard to build their life in Millbrook Heights, far from the chaos and unpredictability of the inner city. As she walked toward her front door, shopping bags from Nordstrom dangling from her wrists, Carol noticed something that made her stop dead in her tracks. A young black teenager was walking slowly down Oakwood Drive, seeming to study the houses with what Carol immediately interpreted as suspicious intent. He was tall, probably around 16 or 17, wearing a navy blue hoodie, dark jeans, and expensive-looking sneakers. What alarmed Carol most was that he appeared to be taking photos with his phone as he walked. Her first instinct was to look around for other neighbors who might be witnessing this obvious case of someone casing their neighborhood. When she didn't see anyone else outside, Carol felt a familiar surge of righteous indignation. This was exactly the kind of situation that required decisive action from responsible community members like herself. The teenager continued down the street, pausing occasionally to look at different houses, sometimes taking pictures, sometimes just standing and observing. To Carol, every gesture screamed criminal intent. She had watched enough true crime documentaries to know that burglars often scouted neighborhoods during daylight hours, photographing security systems and looking for signs that homeowners were away. Without hesitation, Carol pulled out her iPhone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? Yes, I need to report suspicious activity in my neighborhood, Carol said, keeping her voice low while maintaining visual contact with the teenager. There's a young black male walking through Millbrook Heights taking pictures of houses. He's clearly up to no good. Ma'am, can you describe the nature of the suspicious activity? He's walking around photographing houses, obviously looking for places to rob. This is a very expensive neighborhood, and he clearly doesn't belong here. He's been walking around for at least 10 minutes, and he keeps stopping to take pictures. Is he threatening anyone or attempting to enter any properties? Carol felt irritated by the dispatcher's questions. He doesn't need to be actively breaking in for this to be suspicious. Look, I've lived in this neighborhood for 15 years, and I know when someone doesn't belong. Send a patrol car immediately. We'll dispatch an officer to investigate. Please stay inside and avoid confronting the individual. But Carol had no intention of simply staying inside and waiting. This was her neighborhood, her sanctuary, and she wasn't about to let some teenager from who knows where treat it like his personal shopping mall for criminal opportunities. She marched across her front lawn, her tennis shoes crunching on the perfectly maintained grass, and called out in her most authoritative voice, "Excuse me, young man." The teenager stopped and turned around, pulling earbuds from his ears. Up close, Carol could see that he was even younger than she had initially thought, probably 15 or 16 at most. But rather than appearing intimidated by her approach, he looked at her with polite curiosity. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his voice carrying the kind of respectful tone that might have given Carol pause if she hadn't already made up her mind about his intentions. What exactly are you doing in this neighborhood? Carol demanded, crossing her arms over her chest in a gesture she hoped conveyed authority. The teenager blinked, clearly confused by the hostile tone.
I'm sorry, Mom.
Is there a problem? Don't play dumb with me. I saw you taking pictures of houses. What are you planning? Planning? The confusion in the boy's voice seemed genuine, but Carol wasn't buying it. Look, I don't know what kind of neighborhood you're from, but around here we look out for each other. I've already called the police, so you might want to move along before they get here. For the first time, the teenager's polite demeanor cracked slightly. You called the police? Ma'am, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm just what? Just checking out which houses would be easiest to break into? Just figuring out which families have nice cars and expensive belongings. The teenager's shoulders sagged slightly, and Carol saw something in his expression that she would later realize was profound sadness rather than guilt. Ma'am, I live here. I live on Maple Street, 3 blocks over. Carol let out a sharp laugh. Right? And I'm sure you can prove that. Actually, yes, I can. The teenager reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, extracting what appeared to be a driver's license. My name is Marcus Thompson. I live at 247 Maple Street with my mother. Carol glanced at the license but waved it away dismissively. Anyone can fake an ID, and even if you do live somewhere around here, that doesn't explain why you're photographing houses. Before Marcus could respond, the distinctive sound of a police siren echoed through the quiet neighborhood. A patrol car turned onto Oakwood Drive, its lights flashing but siren now silent out of respect for the residential setting. Officer Davis emerged from the patrol car, a middle-aged white man with 20 years of experience who had responded to dozens of similar calls in affluent neighborhoods. He approached the scene with the weary professionalism of someone who had learned to navigate the delicate balance between community relations and actual law enforcement. Good afternoon, Officer Davis said, nodding to both Carol and Marcus. I received a report of suspicious activity. Could someone explain what's going on here? Carol immediately stepped forward, eager to take control of the narrative. Officer, thank you for coming so quickly. This young man has been walking through our neighborhood taking pictures of houses. When I confronted him about it, he became evasive and claimed to live here, which I seriously doubt. Officer Davis turned to Marcus, who was standing quietly with his hands visible and his posture non-threatening. Son, could you tell me what you're doing in the neighborhood today? Yes, sir, Marcus replied respectfully. I live here with my mother. I was taking pictures for a school project about architectural styles in different neighborhoods. I'm in an AP Art History class, and we're studying how home design reflects economic and social factors. He's lying, Carol interjected immediately. I've lived here for 15 years, and I've never seen him before. Officer Davis held up a hand to quiet Carol, then looked back at Marcus. Do you have identification that shows your address? Marcus handed over his driver's license, which Officer Davis examined carefully. This shows an address on Maple Street. Is that where you live with your mother? Yes, sir. We moved here about 6 months ago. Carol crossed her arms tighter. Even if that's true, it doesn't explain why he's taking pictures. Who takes pictures for a school project? Officer Davis was beginning to sense that this situation was less clear-cut than the initial call had suggested. Son, could you show me these pictures you've been taking? Marcus unlocked his phone and handed it to the officer. Officer Davis scrolled through several photos, all of which showed various houses from respectful distances, focusing on architectural details like roof lines, window treatments, and landscaping. There was nothing in the images that suggested criminal intent. These look like exactly what he said. Pictures focusing on architectural features, Officer Davis said, handing the phone back to Marcus. Well, he could still be planning something, Carol insisted, though her voice carried less conviction than before. It was at that moment that a sleek black SUV turned onto Oakwood Drive, moving with the kind of purposeful speed that suggested its driver had received urgent information. The vehicle pulled up behind the patrol car, and Carol watched with growing confusion as a woman emerged from the driver's seat. The woman was African American, probably in her mid-40s, and everything about her appearance and demeanor screamed authority. She wore a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, carried herself with unmistakable confidence, and had the kind of presence that made people instinctively straighten their posture. But what made Carol's stomach drop was the badge clearly visible on the woman's belt and the government plates on her vehicle. Officer Davis immediately recognized the newcomer and snapped to attention. "Agent Thompson, good afternoon." "Officer Davis," the woman replied crisply, her eyes scanning the scene and immediately focusing on Marcus. "I received a call that my son was being detained." Carol felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. "Your son?" Agent Thompson, Director Thompson, as Carol would soon learn, turned her attention to the woman who had called the police on her child. "Yes, my son, Marcus Thompson. He lives with me at 247 Maple Street, and he was working on a school project when you decided he was a criminal." I had no way of knowing," Carol stammered, but Director Thompson held up a hand. "Ma'am, let me introduce myself properly. I'm Director Sarah Thompson, and I run the FBI field office in this city. Marcus is my 15-year-old son, and he's an honor student at Millbrook Academy who is taking photographs for an advanced placement art history project." The silence that followed was deafening. Carol felt every assumption she had made crumbling around her, but her pride wouldn't let her back down completely. "How was I supposed to know that?" she said defensively. "He was acting suspiciously, and I was protecting my neighborhood." Director Thompson's expression remained professionally neutral, but there was ice in her voice when she responded. "Acting suspiciously how, exactly? By walking down a public street? By taking photographs of buildings visible from public property? By being a black teenager in a predominantly white neighborhood?" "I never said anything about race," Carol protested, though even she could hear how weak her denial sounded. "You didn't have to," Director Thompson replied. "Your 911 call specifically mentioned that he was black, as if that were relevant to his supposed criminal behavior. You assumed criminality based on his race and age, not on any actual wrongdoing." Officer Davis, who had been listening to this exchange with growing discomfort, decided to intervene. "Director Thompson, from my perspective, this appears to be a misunderstanding that can be resolved without further incident. Officer Davis, I appreciate your professionalism, but I want to be very clear about what happened here today," Director Thompson said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "A citizen called law enforcement to report a black teenager walking in his own neighborhood, engaging in a perfectly legal activity, because she decided he didn't belong based solely on his appearance." She turned back to Carol, who was now visibly uncomfortable but still trying to maintain her dignity. "Ma'am, what's your name?" "Carol Henderson," Carol replied reluctantly. "Mrs. Henderson, I want you to understand something very clearly. My son has every right to walk through this neighborhood, take photographs from public property, and exist in this space without being subjected to police scrutiny because of his race. Your call to 911 was not about protecting your neighborhood. It was about your discomfort with seeing a black face in a space you consider exclusively yours." "That's not true," Carol insisted, but her protest lacked conviction. Director Thompson pulled out her own phone and dialed a number. "This is Director Thompson. I need you to pull the 911 call that came in approximately 20 minutes ago regarding suspicious activity on Oakwood Drive in Millbrook Heights." "Yes, I'll hold." As they waited, Marcus spoke for the first time since his mother had arrived.
"Mom, I'm okay.
"I was just taking pictures for Mr. Peterson's class like we talked about." "I know, sweetheart," Director Thompson replied, her voice softening when she addressed her son. "You did nothing wrong. You were polite, you cooperated with the officer, and you handled yourself exactly as you should have. Carol watched this interaction with growing realization of how badly she had misjudged the situation. The teenager she had assumed was a criminal was actually a polite, articulate young man who was clearly well-educated and came from a family of distinction. Director Thompson's phone buzzed, and she answered immediately. Yes, I see. Could you read me the exact wording of the complaint? I thought so. Thank you. She ended the call and looked directly at Carol. Mrs. Henderson, your exact words to the 911 dispatcher were, "There's a young black male walking through Millbrook Heights taking pictures of houses. He's clearly up to no good." You also stated that he clearly doesn't belong here, and that you could tell because you know when someone doesn't belong. Each word hit Carol like a physical blow. Hearing her own language repeated back to her in this context made the racial bias undeniable, even to herself. "I was just being cautious," she said weakly. "Cautious about what?" Director Thompson asked. "About a teenager walking down a public street? About someone taking photographs that are perfectly legal? Or cautious about a black person being in your predominantly white neighborhood?" Officer Davis shifted uncomfortably. "Director Thompson, I think we can consider this matter resolved. There's clearly been a misunderstanding, and no actual crime has been committed." "Officer Davis, you're absolutely right that no crime has been committed by my son," Director Thompson replied. "However, I want Mrs. Henderson to understand the full implications of what happened here today." She turned back to Carol, who was now clearly regretting ever making that phone call. "Mrs. Henderson, false reporting to emergency services is a misdemeanor in this state. More importantly, what you did today could have had serious consequences for my son. Young black men are statistically more likely to experience violence during police encounters, often because of exactly the kind of assumptions you made today." Carol felt her cheeks burning with shame and embarrassment. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt. Intent isn't the only thing that matters," Director Thompson said firmly. "Impact matters too. My son now has to live with the knowledge that his neighbors view him as a threat simply because of how he looks. He has to live with the reality that he can't walk through his own neighborhood without being seen as suspicious." Marcus spoke up again, his voice quiet but clear. "It's okay, Mom. This isn't the first time something like this has happened." Those words hung in the air like a challenge to everyone present. The idea that a 15-year-old honor student had already experienced multiple incidents of racial profiling was sobering, even for Officer Davis, who had seen his share of community tensions. Director Thompson's expression softened as she looked at her son, but when she turned back to Carol, her voice was firm. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm not going to press charges, and I'm not going to file a formal complaint. But I am going to ask you to think very carefully about what happened here today." "I will," Carol said, and for the first time, she sounded genuinely contrite. "I hope you will. Because the next time you see a young person of color in your neighborhood, I want you to remember this conversation. I want you to remember that they might be an honor student working on a school project. They might be the child of an FBI director, or a doctor, or a teacher, or just a regular family trying to live their lives in peace." Director Thompson looked around the small group that had gathered. "But most importantly, I want you to remember that it shouldn't matter who their parents are or what their grades are. Every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect until they actually do something to warrant suspicion." Officer Davis nodded respectfully. "Director Thompson, if there's nothing else you need from me, I'll file this as a resolved misunderstanding." "That's fine, Officer Davis. Thank you for your professionalism." As Officer Davis returned to his patrol car, Director Thompson turned to her son. "Marcus, are you ready to go home?" "Yes, ma'am. But can I finish taking the pictures I need for my project?" Director Thompson smiled proudly. "Of course you can. This is your neighborhood too." As Marcus walked away to continue his photography, Director Thompson faced Carol one last time. "Mrs. Henderson, I hope you'll use this experience to reflect on your assumptions about people who don't look like you. Carol nodded, finally finding her voice. Director Thompson, I'm sorry. I was wrong about your son, and I was wrong about the whole situation. I appreciate your apology, Director Thompson replied, but I hope you understand that this isn't really about me or my son specifically. This is about how all people of color are treated in spaces like this. I think I'm beginning to understand that, Carol said quietly. Good, because the goal isn't to make you feel guilty. It's to make you think differently going forward. As Director Thompson walked back to her SUV, Carol stood alone on the sidewalk, watching Marcus continue his photography project with the same careful attention to architectural detail that she had initially interpreted as criminal surveillance. She could see now what she had missed before: his genuine interest in the buildings, his respectful distance from private property, his careful composition of each photograph. But more than that, she was beginning to understand the deeper implications of her actions. She had called the police on a child who was doing exactly what he said he was doing, simply because she couldn't imagine that a black teenager might legitimately belong in her neighborhood. That evening, Carol found herself unable to concentrate on her usual routine. She kept thinking about Marcus Thompson, about his politeness even when being wrongly accused, about his mother's controlled anger and dignified response, about the casual way he had mentioned that this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. She thought about her own children, who had grown up in Millbrook Heights with the PR. She thought about the assumptions she had made and the potential consequences if the situation had escalated differently. Do you think Carol's apology was enough? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Should she face consequences, or does she deserve a second chance?